What's going on, 3DMJers? Eric Helms here, and I'd like to welcome you to Season 15 of the 3D Muscle Journey podcast. We kicked this one off with a bang. Myself and Brad Loomis talk with our friend, colleague, and pro natural bodybuilder, Jeff Alberts, about his whole most recent 2019 season. In it, Jeff appeared on stage 7 times across many months of dieting, and that recently came to a close in New York City at the WNBF World Championships last month. I had the unique honor and privilege of being Jeff's coach and decision-making confidant during the last few months of his prep journey. He relied on me for mostly emotional support, and we got to talk all about that in today's episode. You'll hear us discuss Jeff's timelines, his training protocols, the nutritional game plans, and how he managed travel, vacations, peak weeks, guest posing, and coaching all in the midst of a contest prep. Brad and I also speak freely as Jeff's friends and talk to him now that he's past the prep brain period, and we get to have a candid discussion with him about what he learned and what our observations were this go around. I know you guys will get a ton of actionable takeaways from this episode, even if you've never competed before, as the year in the life of any lifter carries many great lessons to pick apart and improve upon. So let's get right into it. Here is a contest prep case study featuring Jeff Alberts with Brad Loomis and, of course, myself, Eric Helms. All right. So I'm pretty excited about this episode today because, Jeff, you've had a triumphant return to the stage from 2014. Happened to coincide with the 10-year anniversary of 3DMJ, and you had a long prep. You competed in, I think July was your first show, and then you brought it all the way to Worlds, which was just a few weeks back, which I was really stoked to be able to come out for, watch you compete, and be a part of that whole experience. So I think what we want to do today is just to kind of give a behind-the-scenes look to the 3DMJ audience so they can kind of see what your experience was like for this 2019 prep and see what they can learn from it, to hear what you learned from it, really, and then just to chat through it.
Word. Let's do it, man. Let's do it. Let's do it. I got good energy now. I'm well fed. We did the recovery diet, or we're in the middle of it.
That's right.
So cheeks are a little rounder. My wife loves me a little more. So yeah, let's do it.
I love it. It's the recovery diet. That's how we do podcasts post prep with some kind of energy.
That's it.
Hey Jeff, one of my questions that I was thinking of before we actually got on this call. I mean, July was your first show, but obviously prep started way before that. And to be honest with you, I don't remember really when you actually kind of started prepping, because that's kind of the way we want things. We want life to kind of mirror prep a little bit, just kind of like more balanced one way or the other. But maybe start with the very beginning when it was like, I don't know what, January, December, November, prior to your show?
Shit, I don't even remember. It's been so long. No, it actually, I do remember very vividly. It was first week of September of 2018 is when I was like, okay, I'm actually going to start dialing down for Worlds in 2019. So like 14 months ago. And I know a lot of people are going to go, holy shit, 14 months, that's nuts. But like you said, Brad, it wasn't a linear prep. It was more like a lifestyle prep. So meaning like, birthdays, anniversaries, date nights, holidays, like all that was, I partaked in all that for the most part, almost the entire way through. Probably the last month or two is when I kind of like, okay, yeah, I need to dial in a little more. And maybe a couple months before Mayhem, that's when I contacted Eric and said, hey, keep me accountable here because I'm a little behind and I don't want to look fat on stage. So let's make it happen. But yeah, back in the beginning, first week of September of 2018 was when I officially started it.
So it's the marathon prep, but the pace was not at a sprint. I think it's what people always need to remember when they hear about these really long preps. That's a strategy one uses to make any given day or phase of prep not necessarily as difficult, to maybe enhance adherence or make, like you said, it work better with a lifestyle. And I think, we had some conversations right at the end of Worlds, which we will not go into now, just plant that little seed, a little teaser for the end of the podcast when we get to it, where we discussed how there probably is such thing as too long of a prep, even if you do it, the way we're discussing. So there's pros and cons, which I think is really, hopefully our listeners are at the stage now in their intellectual developments of being students of the sport that they don't see things in, is it good or bad? Is it black or white? Should I have a long prep or a short prep? Should I diet fast or slow? That there's a time and a place. But anyway, nonetheless, so you started in September of last year, and your first show was the Mayhem in July.
Yeah. So like 10 months later. So
something like that.
Yeah. So I like people are probably going to know what body weight was when I started. It was like right around 203. And stage weight was like 169, 170. But initially it wasn't like, hey, let's go hard. It was, let me just take a few off here and there. So by the time I got to Christmas time, I was about 10 pounds down. So in the low 190s. And I remember I was like, you know what, I'm just going to chill out, diet break, enjoy family. And I actually gained maybe 3 or 4 pounds during the holidays. And then January we started back up. So like I said, it wasn't linear, the whole way through. It was like, okay, let's push a little bit, back off, push a little bit, back off. So yeah.
So in many ways, like the pre-holidays 2018 portion was almost like a brief mini cut with a brief diet break before you got into like the prep.
Yeah, kind of like like we say, the diet before the diet. Let's get to a little bit better starting position. So I was like in probably like the low 190s in January, maybe low, somewhere in there. And then I remember when I started out in January, February, things were going okay, but I think I was too loose. Like, weekends came around, let's have a glass of wine with the wife or whatever. Refeeds weren't as rigid. And I was like, okay, here we are. We're getting a little too complacent because I'm looking a little too soft. And if I want to get on stage with you, Eric, the 10-year anniversary, I'm like, I don't want to, not fit the part or, look the way I'm supposed to be looking. So that's where I was like, okay, I need to have someone there as more of like an accountability and for emotional support, just because you guys know me pretty well. Like, I can get a little loose on weekends, on the refeeds and those types of things. So that's something that for me, I think having a coach, it's not necessarily X's and O's, because I remember Berto was coaching me. It was kind of same deal. He gave me a lot of flexibility with the X's and O's, but it was just more of having that accountability factor there and someone to kind of lean on. Yeah. And you know me pretty well. So I was like, okay, it's a pretty good match.
Yeah, one of the I very much kind of, once you open the door and welcome me in as your kind of emotional support, which huge honor, by the way, thank you. And it was really cool doing that. I saw some distinct phases that I would love to get your thoughts on. I'll give you kind of my coach's perspective on what I saw in terms of your emotional outlook. But I know the last time you sat down and said, you know what, I'm going to do a contest prep, you had to pull the plug on it. And it didn't necessarily go to plan. And I know that in addition just to the fact that you are now, heading into your 5th decade of life soon, that...
Oh my gosh.
Like the way I worded that?
Yeah. You too, Brad. Yeah. What are you smiling about?
So I know that there, I saw it as some of, I think, your approach to being a little looser and taking it slow. I think it almost provided you the ability to gain confidence, having had previous injury, getting into the latter stages of your career, or fearing that it might be the latter stages of your career, not knowing how it's going to go. I know that taking that approach early on, that's not necessarily like all in full commitment, I saw that as the opportunity for you to be like testing the waters. And then I noticed once you had gotten to a certain level and you went, okay, we're going to target July, your verbiage definitely changed. You were like, I think people have probably heard you say the term chasing the physique, which I think is a really good holistic term to understand that prep's not just about striding glutes. It's not just about hitting a certain stage weight. It's about, getting you to the best place where you look best on stage, and that's going to look different for everybody. But also, I think it was you turned a corner where at one point you were like, let's do what we need to do to look the part in July. And I think that was when you started talking in that manner, that's when I was like, all right, his confidence is here. Because this is the guy who, back in the early 2000s, you could drop 30 pounds in 6 to 8 weeks. You shouldn't have. You didn't look your best. But the fact that you could, it just means you have that ignition key to really go all in and to push it. And I think that's a really good card to be able to play, to have. Like, I can do what needs to be done, to have, like, if I've got a deadline, I'll meet it. That's not the ideal way to go, but that's just the reality of bodybuilding many times. So anyway, I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Is that perspective accurate that I kind of saw?
Yeah, that's a pretty good perspective, because you're right, like that 2017, 2018 prep where it ended up being a failed prep. It was due to injuries, aches and pains. It was poor training, and, seeing my ability to train on a high level kind of diminish, and then seeing my physique kind of look that way. I was like, okay, shit, you know what? I have to realize I'm older now. I can't do the same. I can't squat and deadlift like I used to. And the things that I felt like at the time when I was on a high level, that's what got me to the success in 2014. Mm-hmm. So seeing that not work anymore, and I'm like, oh shit, maybe I am getting old. Maybe my body's telling me I'm done. So yeah, it was kind of like you mentioned to me too, during our back and forth, like you're kind of like a boxer who's gotten knocked out. You lost a little bit of confidence. And I think Brad can maybe even chime in on this with his training, because he's dealt with injuries now as a guy approaching his 5th decade of life, like Eric puts it. You kind of wonder, like, can I regain and get myself back on top? And is that kind of how you felt too, Brad, with the shit that you've kind of gone through the last year or so?
Yeah. I remember it was either a podcast or it was maybe one of our meetings how I spoke about I can't remember exactly how I said it, but Jeff, you basically summed it up in one term. You said, I don't have that 5th gear anymore. Because we used to be able to just find it somehow. It's like, wow, there is no way he's getting another repetition. And we would dig in and get another repetition.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad. But, by golly, we would just dive in and do that on a fairly frequent basis. And I don't know what it is. Call it wiser, call it fear, call it whatever. I don't have that 5th gear anymore. I never really push failure anymore. And yeah, I don't know. That's the biggest thing that I've noticed in my training, is that those times when I really, quote unquote, go there are far and few between, whereas they used to be pretty darn frequent back in, when I was making those crazy videos in 09 and 10 and 11.
Yeah.
There's a blog post I wrote called was it Beginners Don't Lose Your Mind and Veterans Don't Lose Your Edge?
Yeah.
And I think
I remember that.
Yeah, I'll sum it up, because I've been there too. I remember I didn't do a single barbell overhead press for like 8 months after my neck got hurt, and I lost the strength in my right arm for a little while and almost needed surgery. And there was also a period when Berto first met me, and maybe around 2010 or 11, he was like, hey, maybe you shouldn't go to failure all the time. I think that might be what's holding you back. And I think a lot of people who are drawn to bodybuilding come from a very extreme approach initially. And the only way they know where their limits are is by pushing to them. And that's not the best way to get most things done, But it's important to know how to push to your limit. And I think the natural learning curve is that when you push way past it and you suffer some of the consequences, whether that's just suboptimal training or being too extreme in life, sacrificing relationships, etc., whether it's the emotional or it's the physical side of it that causes issues, or the food relationship or body image relationship, like post show, it's very like the rest of your career becomes trying to figure out where too much of a pullback is and where the appropriate level of getting to go there is, and then going from that light switch to the dimmer switch, and then knowing when to make concessions or push at certain speeds. And I know for me that's kind of like this ever-moving target, And I have definitely gone through periods where I've quote unquote lost that killer instinct because I've been afraid due to injury, or I've been depressed or something like that. And I think that's pretty natural. But yeah, man, I think that the mark of the late stage or advanced athlete is to have that card, be able to play it, and more often than not, know when it's the right time to push the chips in and go, yep, I'm betting the house.
Yeah, so that's basically kind of what I kind of learned with that failed prep was like, okay, I can't keep doing what I used to do. Like, obviously, my body is older. Like, it's not going to recover and respond as it once did. So I'm like, okay, let's call it quits on this prep. And then it was like, okay, I need to change approach. And in a sense, it was like I was becoming a newbie again. I have this older body that I have to learn how it operates. So I think just, the biggest thing was like, okay, the small off season I had from April of 2018 to the beginning of September of when I started this prep was, okay, I just need to switch out the movements that's been hurting me. Don't go to failure as much, bring the intensity down. And there was, my training, I should say, still to this day, I train in fear. Like even like I don't do squats anymore because that was the big issue was, getting a lot of low back strains. But going to a leg press, it's much safer. I feel more comfortable in it, but I still in the back of my mind, every set I do, I'm like thinking, keep my butt against this pad, make sure I open my hips up. I'm like constantly doing these cues and gauging, even on like every rep, gauging like depth and how it's feeling and how I'm like actually pushing through the platform. Like, just because I'm like, okay, I don't want to do anything wrong to trigger another injury. So it's almost like every training session there is that fear, but that fear, it's a good fear. It's not a bad fear. It's like, it's not a fear where I'm like preventing myself from performing well, or it's more of like a good fear. It's like, it's keeping me safe. And that, through the prep, like I had that upper pec tear on the RDLs, it's like, okay, I was like, man, okay, here we go again. So it was like, man, I just got another uppercut. I'm on the canvas again. So, so like you said, Eric, when I started that prep, I was very, very cautious and almost training in a lot of fear and unsure of, can I actually make it through to the end? That was a big thing, was just making it to the end of prep. It wasn't even, hey, let's try to place in worlds. It was, let me just make it to the damn mayhem stage. That's all I wanted to do initially. And it wasn't even like, hey, I want to win the mayhem. It was more like, I just want to be able to do this again and have fun and share it with like, you and everybody else, and have Brad out there in the crowd, my dad and my wife and all that. So it's getting to the mayhem was like a huge, huge relief. It was almost like, okay, yeah, I can still do this. So,
yeah. Hey, Jeff, you made a couple of key additions to the 3DMJ. What do we call it now? The 3DMJ dungeon. And that being, like you said, that leg press, the hip sled that you bought, and then you also bought that a row machine. It's a chest supported row machine.
Yeah.
When did that happen in the prep?
So the PowerTech compact leg press, because everybody's going to ask what it is. They would constantly. So that I purchased actually, I want to say before prep even started. So that was part of the off season. Because I was like, I got to stop these squats. I need to do something else. So I was like, okay, let me invest in a leg press. So I did a little research. I'm like, okay, that one, it's compact, it'll fit in my garage, and we'll roll with it. And so yeah, that through the off season and through the prep, that was a saving grace. Like I was able to, and I actually think my quads actually benefited more so from it, just because it's more direct volume on my quads versus squats, and it saved my back for sure. And then as far as the seated row machine, I bought that one, I think during the prep it was. Because prior to that, I was doing a lot of pin lay rows, seated cable rows, and the seated cable row in my garage is you actually have to sit on the floor. So it's just a pain in the ass, kind of hard on the body. So I'm like, I'm just gonna buy a seated row machine, which was a great investment. The thing was only like $250 or whatever it was. So just it saved, again, another tool I can use to save my lower back, because that was like the big issue of my issue with like the failed prep was in 2018.
Yeah, there's go ahead, Brett.
No, you go first this time. You let me go first last time, Eric.
I was gonna say there's your personality, Jeff. It's one where you're really good at solving problems, but you also like patterns and structure and like once you've established a comfort zone that works, it's difficult to get outside of that. So it was like you mentioned this a few times, like Berto and I will mention, hey, try this, hey, try this, hey, try this. And you have to talk yourself into actually trying it. But then once you do, if it works well, awesome, you're all on board. And it was really cool to see you. I mean, you kind of got forced there because of your body's limitations. But once you started to get creative, man, it was really good to see you on vacation, training with a water jug. It was awesome to see you doing things like back extensions over the Smith bar, holding a plate instead of doing RDL or deadlifts when to save your back. And it was just, it's good to see that part of your personality work in conjunction instead of in contrast with that part of you that's like, stay in my lane, stay in my comfort zone, and to really you benefited from it. It was cool to see that, because I know in other times when you couldn't set up the ideal situation, sometimes it'd be like, I'm not going to set anything up. So that to me, it was a really good example for people watching to see you be able to find a way to do be like Brian Whitaker said on Iron Culture, to be optimal given the constraints of the situation. And you did that like multiple times during prep, which really impressed me. I
appreciate that. Thank you. Well, I mean, a big credit's like to you, like, and all you guys, because you guys have all had, whether it's directly you said, hey, Jeff, do this or that, or try this or that, or I'm just kind of just visually watching you guys. I'm like, okay, because that's a big thing too. Like for me, I kind of look at like, let's say like a Marshall Johnson, he's a decade older than me, and he's already, he's one of the best natural bodybuilders of all time, one of them, at an older age. And, he has limitations too. I'm like, okay, if he can do it, I can do it. So it's kind of like, okay, I just need to not have an ego, and like you said, get out of the comfort zone a little bit and experiment and not be scared to fail, and, learn more and more. And it's kind of like when I was doing so well with the RDL, like, I mean, hitting PR, like 435 for like 6 or whatever. Something crazy.
And good ass RDLs too. It still doesn't make any sense. Like, it's so strong.
Well, my body was like, hey, this doesn't make any sense. So hey, let's have your upper pec tear. And so you're like, oh, hey, let's maybe go to those hyperextensions. Like in the past, I would have been like, oh my gosh, the RDL is bread and butter. That's like a big compound movement. There goes my glutes and hamstrings. Mm-hmm. Hyperextension. I mean, how am I going to load that? The load's not going to be the same. But it's proven. I mean, there's enough stimulus there. I equated the volume decent enough, and the intensity was there. So, I mean, it just made sense. And then, as you roll with it and you see, oh, nothing bad's happening. Your muscle's still there. It's like, okay, then you just get more confident with it, and you get more confident with change. That's a big thing. And I think, my personality is one, like the comfort zone, and kind of blame my dad for that. Just because my dad, I remember when he changed jobs, he, like the day before he was supposed to start, he had to drive down to the grocery store that he was going to be starting at, and he had to see how everything was. I'm like, can't you just do that tomorrow when you're there? He's like, no, I need to So yeah, it's ingrained in my DNA, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's one of those double-edged swords that bodybuilders both can use to their success, but can become sometimes a barrier in certain circumstances. It's that dichotomy where we get the most work done, we're most productive, and we feel the safest to push when we're in our comfort zone. But if our comfort zone's too narrow, then we're not resilient enough to be adaptable in new situations. And aging, travel, all these things are the unavoidable life constraints that are put on us, injury. So I think it was really cool to see you do that. And I felt like in many ways this prep, you were building confidence and using that to lay the path in front of you. So you were like, the train building its tracks in front of it as it was going and getting faster and faster. Like, I think some of the verbiage I used in some of our early check-ins were that you had like multiple fuels going in, so that if you did get uppercut and knocked onto the canvas, you had a lot of like backup generators, if you will. You had the motivation of this being the 10-year anniversary of 3DMJ, sharing the experience with all of us, being an example to people, proving to yourself that you could do this. Also, the part of you that doesn't want to just compete at a high level and really capitalize on your performance, and get out there while you're still at the peak. And also wanted to be an example to your family and find that kind of approach that pays respect to what you're doing, and kind of the whole 3DMJ mission statement of using prep as a vehicle to be like a better human and to really show how that can be done. So it was cool to see that all of that came together and you were able to rely on different motivations to get to where you needed to be. Because when we decided, like, look, we're going to get you on stage for July and you're going to look the part, you went hard. You were doing, you had the step count up high enough to where you hurt your foot, So
yeah, I got a walking injury.
Exactly. This is how hardcore bodybuilding is. Our injuries are binge eating and toe walking injury things.
Yeah, what's kind of cool, because I reflect back, I'm like, okay, this prep had like different phases of my career in one prep. I was like, okay, 8 weeks to mayhem, got to go hard. Okay, it's like I went back to 1993 when I lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks. So yeah, that's not ideal, but going through that, it taught me how to grind and persevere. Mm-hmm. So, okay, 8 weeks, we're just going to go, okay, 93 Jeff, we're going to get after it and make it happen. And then once we kind of made it to the mayhem stage, and I was like, okay, got there. I was I'd say 3 to 5 pounds off of the conditioning level that we needed to be in, but yet still fared pretty well competitively. I was like, oh, I actually got one first place vote against Sam Okunolo. Holy crap. Maybe I can actually beat this guy. So it was like the fuel was like, hey, let's get to mayhem and celebrate 10 years with 3DMJ, and let's have my dad see me on stage again and prove to myself that I can actually do this. And that's how my posing routine was all about, was like, just keep moving forward. That's what the whole theme was. And then it switched gears to like, okay, now I can beat these guys. Like, then it was like fuel to like that fuel just to try to, not in a sense, hey, I need to beat this guy, but it was like just that competitiveness. Like, that's what's really cool about like having someone like such a guy like Sam, who's just an awesome bodybuilder, not just like physically, but mentally, emotionally. He's like well equipped, and to have someone like that to kind of like fill you on to make yourself better. So huge respect to him, just how he is as not just a bodybuilder, but as a human. I'm like, yes. Man, I want to be on that level. So it's like he kind of like indirectly fueled me to get better. So yeah, we dug another 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and we went at it again, head to head. And of course, I call myself Grandpa. That's what I told him on stage at the Mayhem. I said, Grandpa's here. And yeah, we got to the max hype, and he still beat me, but I was a little better. So if you're listening to this, Sam, thank you for pushing me.
Yeah, big shout out to Sam Okunolo. Excellent, true champion in every way. I mean that, emotionally, mentally, and incredible physique as well. Just a really great leader in the community. And so for everyone who's not aware, Jeff's first show, Muscle Mayhem, we had a whole podcast, if you want to go back and check that out, where we reflected on the Muscle Mayhem and how that kind of was the you could say something that we all orbited around as far as a show that kind of generated 3DMJ. And then you did the Max Hype show, which was in Orlando, Florida. I guess that was it 4 weeks later?
Yeah, I think it was 4. I want to say 4, somewhere in there. Yeah, 3 or 4.
I think it was the same day as my show in New Zealand. So it was August 10th. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. That sounds about right. Yeah, that does. That is right.
So it might have only been 3 weeks actually.
Okay.
So, but nonetheless, we pushed hard for that one as well, and then we had a bit of a break before any kind of show was on the direct horizon. So after the Max Hype show, what was next up? Did you have a guest posing?
We did a guest posing. So we did a little bit of a diet break after the Max Hype show. And then so what's interesting is that guest posing, I still was like, I want to look good and peak good. I took it. I saw it as an opportunity to try to like have a good peak. Like, let me see if I can peak well for this, and then apply it to future shows, specifically Worlds, because that was like the end goal, of course. And that was, like, looking in hindsight, probably one of my better peaks, I would say.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that has to do with stress. Like, I just went into it like, I'm not competing. I'm just going there to pose. And I was like so chill and so relaxed. And he was even travel too, because I traveled from California to Washington, so there was flight and hotel and all that. And usually it's a little stressful, but I was like, this ain't no thing. I was just chilling and poised, and I was like, I peaked perfectly for it. And of course, I'm like, why couldn't I look like this a couple weeks back, But but it was I had a good time with that. That's one thing I say, like, guest posing for me. It's like, I know people don't really care for the individual round too much, or the free posing routine sometimes, but to me, it's like my opportunity to kind of showcase the art of bodybuilding, as opposed
Absolutely.
to, hey, I'm trying to beat this other guy to my left or right. It's like, hey, look at what I actually created, and let me show you how artistic it can be. So that was kind of a cool little experience. But I'll say, during my free posing routine at the Mayhem, you know who I heard the most in the audience?
Who?
Brad's whistle. Brad's whistle. And so I knew Brad was going to love that one, because Brad's a total Rocky guy. And the music was like a mix, a Rocky mix. So so it's cool hearing Brad's whistle.
You're right. That whistle's loud. That whistle is loud at football games.
Oh yeah.
I would imagine in closed auditorium it would be very noticeable.
Yeah, because if you go on my Facebook page or on my wife's Facebook page, she had it live, and all you hear is Brad's whistle.
I did dig. That was an awesome posing routine. I did dig that.
Thank you.
And you're I think it's easy just to kind of not put too much stock into the posing routine. It's like, it's something you have to do. It's kind of a throwback. Yeah. But I think people really underestimate how much value there can be in placing meaning in certain aspects of bodybuilding, when the nature of prep is something that it makes you get consumed, super focused on one thing. It sometimes removes your ability to partake in joy that you have in other parts of your life. Like, I find I get so focused, like, I don't enjoy Netflix as much, even shows I normally like, or like conversations with people. If they're not something that is engaging, I find it harder to focus, and just little stuff like that. Your brain starts to truly respond to prep in such a way that you become uber focused, and it can be counterproductive. And if you get really, really focused on certain aspects of prep or certain goals, if you don't have like a portfolio of goals to achieve out of a prep, I think it's easier to be disappointed, and then to reflect back and go, man, I really could have enjoyed that more. The most common, I'd say obvious thing we see as coaches is just people who get really, really focused on winning, and they don't notice that they made improvements, or they don't notice, or they miss the opportunity to improve the process of prep, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, like for example, to go back to my little experience this season with the Zane project, where I got to collaborate with Brandon, and try to recreate some of those classic shots with Frank Zane on the beach with Brandon. That was just a really cool thing because that was one of my goals. That was something I could focus on. That was another outlet for me to enjoy the process and have that portfolio. So I think you don't have to necessarily be someone who loves the free round or appreciate the art of bodybuilding. But I'd say for someone who might appreciate that, but who thinks they don't have the time or the energy to focus on it because they've got to get in shape, they've got to do their cardio, they've got to do their macros, they've got to live life, and man, planning out 60 seconds of something that's not really judged, I just don't have time for that or the mental energy. Well, maybe, but it might also be another opportunity for you to really be present for an experience and to make meaning out of it. I know it is for me, and I know that for the audience, it's something they take away from it, and it makes the sport a lot more engaging. So anyway, I would just put that out, that I think, Jeff, you did a fantastic job. You had a few different posing routines this season, and they were pretty awesome. I thought they were really cool, and it was good to see you sharing and celebrating, that aspect of bodybuilding this season.
I appreciate that. So yeah, the guest posing in Washington was actually that routine. I was like, okay, I'm going to use Bocelli. And the reason I did that song, not so much for me, like, okay, so the environment I'm going in, like Katie Wayman White, who promoted the show, she's kind of like the female version of myself. Like, she's competed in like crazy amounts of shows. She's won like probably over 20 pro titles.
Yep.
And she's a little like she comes across as very elegant. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do Bocelli. That's elegant. It's gonna fit. And so it was like almost like my posing routine was just more like, hey, let me try to please her because she's promoting the show, and she loved it, by the way. And I was like, okay, perfect. That made me happy. She dug it, so it was well worth putting the time and energy into it, and I got a lot out of it. So yeah, and then I got to do it, of course, at the NGA show, pro show I did as well. So I went ahead and did it there, and that went over pretty well. So that was the show after. So that was my fourth show, was the NGA Olympian.
That's right.
Yeah. So again, a different fuel source, right? So it's going from Mayhem 10-year anniversary. That's why we're one of the main fuel sources. Now we're going to try to beat Sam Okinola. And then now we're going to guest pose. And then now, okay, let's go to this NGA Pro show, which was an hour from my house. And it wasn't so much, hey, I want to try to, of course I wanted to try to win. Everybody wants to win when they get there. But it was more like, okay, this is another opportunity for my family to see me. It's close to home. My stepdaughter, Caroline, has never seen me compete before. She missed out on the Mayhem experience. She's seen me guest pose about 5 years ago, but never seen me in actual competition. And she's pretty competitive herself with soccer and all that. So I'm like, I think it'd be a cool thing for her to experience. So that was kind of the fuel source there as far as doing that show. And, just having my close family there after the show was over, bringing everybody up on stage, taking the photos. That's the memory of that show I'm going to take away. Yeah, I won the show, which is awesome. Like, yeah, cool, I won a pro show. But I know that's going to fade over time. And no one's going to, like 5 years from now, no one's going to go, oh, Jeff won the Pro Olympian. But I'll have those pictures with me, a lifetime. And so that, to me, is like a huge fuel source for me at this point in my career, is just to enjoy the process, enjoy and celebrate the shows, like just celebrate everything with everybody, because that's what I get the most out of this, doing this. And that's why I'm going to come back, but we'll talk about that later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's Eric Helms. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. As you know, at 3DMJ we promote evidence-based approaches to the lifting community. If that's something you want to dive deeper into, I'd encourage you to check out my research review, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport, or for short, MASS. This is a review that myself, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Greg Knuckles put out every month. We cover the latest research publications that are applicable to strength and physique athletes, or anyone who's looking to get stronger or improve their body comp. Our content is in both written and video format. For more information on how to subscribe, check out 3dmusclejourney.com/mass. That's 3dmusclejourney.com/MASS for further details. Thanks for tuning in. There's something to be said for, once you get in shape, really maximizing the time and the opportunities you get to be on stage. Not only do you get much more comfortable being on stage, and as you mentioned that you felt you peaked better because you were less stressed for the guest posing show, man, I can tell you that I'd say for myself and for most of the athletes I worked with, it's tough to know what the chicken or the egg is. Does the show make you stress so you don't peak well, or do generally stressed people not peak that well, and then because they're not peaking well, they get stressed? It's hard to know, but for the most part, whether it's correlation or causation, it certainly seems to me that the more stress you can control going into a peak week, the more predictable your body is, and the closer to best you're going to look. I don't know, Brad. Do you agree with that? Do you feel like you see a visual difference with less stressed athletes on stage?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I didn't believe it at first. It was kind of like, that's an old wives' tale or something like that. But I have to agree. When you're that lean, when you're down to, as you put it, Eric, essential levels of body fat, you can see fluid. And you can hold on to, as little as 8 ounces of fluid, and it's visible. It's kind of the same thing as when we drop about a pound of body weight. When you've only got 7-8 pounds of body fat on your whole body, and you drop a pound of weight, no matter how much fat you lost right there, it's noticeable. And so, yeah, it's the same thing when you see stress in the form of fluids, whether it be cortisol, lactic acid, it's very visible. And even though it early on, I didn't really buy into it, working with high level athletes is very educational, and really, to be honest with you, I want to say that one of the first times I actually saw that was on Berto. It seemed to me that he did a guest posing somewhere sometime where he was really stressed out about something, or how Berto is. He doesn't show it. He's just doing his thing.
This might have been the ibuprofen.
Yeah, that was in
inflammatory
2014.
response he had.
Oh, is that what it was? The ibuprofen?
Yep. He took some ibuprofen, and he just got all puffy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's funny. He noticed it, and it wasn't too apparent. But it's the kind of it's funny. Like the mechanisms are difficult to elucidate. We don't necessarily really know, but we do see. So when you're generally stressed, there's a physiological response to stress, and some of that has to do with you can have like you said, cortisol can be elevated. That can make you retain some water. That could show up in the subcutaneous space. You can also have kind of autoimmune type responses. One thing I noticed, and this was actually during my recovery diet while I was in Singapore and Hong Kong, I was eating new stuff. I was traveling. I was a little stressed. And I was just like, Berto, I can tell I'm lean, certain spots of me, but I just look weird. I look kind of like a bloated, smooth baby, just in my chest and my stomach. And I was like, let me just take some Zyrtec, just some over-the-counter antihistamines. And 2 days later, I dropped a kilo, and I looked appropriate for the level of body fat I had. And I was like, what? And it's actually something I've been doing with peak weeks now. I did that with Mark Spinks, one of my athletes who competed this year. And, Jeff, you did it the last couple peaks. And it's really difficult to know how much of a role it plays, or when it plays a role, or what have you. But I will say that Mark Spinks' best peak was when he'd, taken some antihistamines. So anything that could reasonably result in an inflamed state, if you will. I know that's thrown around and used incorrectly so often in the fitness blogosphere that I don't want people to take it the wrong way or to think that I'm making a very specific mechanistic physiological argument. But certainly some of the physiological cascades that are related to stress seem to make people look worse. I don't know what the hell that is, but it's certainly something we've seen time and time again. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've actually had preps that was our main strategy, was just do this year low stress, and essentially do what we've done in the past, minus whatever. I mean, I've even gone so far as to say, you know what, I don't care what your check-in really entails. I just want you to rant at me for 5 minutes. Just let that all out. That's been my whole strategy a lot of times, is just have, as it's going to be stressful. There's no two ways about it. But I mean, if we can reduce that even 15, 20, 25%, it's a lot of times it is visible.
That's what I've noticed with myself, not just with this prep, but like in 2014 too, when I won the Pro International in 2014. That I remember, like, I made it a point to make sure I traveled and got to my destination on Thursday morning, so I had 2 days ahead of the show to settle in my hotel, make sure I got all my food, just, and then in the evenings I was, sitting on the couch watching NFL Network, just chilling. And I peaked exceptionally well for that show. And then Worlds that year, it was kind of like, well, we got there, I think it was on either Thursday night or Friday morning, and we were running around on Friday. And I just remember being a little bit more high strung. And then this year too, like, I made it a point for Worlds, hey, I'm getting there Thursday morning. I'm going to be, cool and calm and collected ahead of time. Even the NGA show, that was an hour from my house, I rented a hotel. I mean, I could easily have just said, hey, I'll just drive there, on the day of the show. It's only an hour. But I'm like, no, I'm going to get a hotel room. I checked in early on a Friday, right? And I just settled in and got just really relaxed and calm. And I peaked pretty well. So I think the stress is I think you should definitely game plan for that. Plan ahead, especially if you're traveling to a show. I think it's pretty important to do that.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's an accident that there's a fair number of people who swear by having a little bit of wine or alcohol before they get on stage. And many of them will justify that as, well, wine dehydrates you, alcohol dehydrates you, so it specifically dehydrates the subcutaneous layer and you look lean. Yeah, or maybe you're just stressed out and you had some alcohol and you chilled the hell out.
Now you're chilling.
I think that probably has enough to do with it. That would surprise me. So yeah, I think that's something that really shouldn't be undervalued. It's just managing your own stress levels very well may have a positive effect on the way you look. And I know some super stress balls are going to listen to this, and it's going to be one more thing for them to worry about. And you're going to be 2 days out stressed about being stressed and worried that you're not relaxed enough and thinking it's going to negatively affect your look. But hey, this is just the something we all got to work on as we progress in our bodybuilding career mentally.
But there's one thing I try to stress to my athletes and even myself is like, okay, we just worked for months on end to get to the stage. Like, that should be looked at as a celebration of that body of work. Like, you're presenting all your work. So why would you want to go in there super stressed, high strung? I mean, Sunday you'll wake up and go, what was I stressed over? I didn't have fun. I didn't enjoy myself. I mean, that's happened to me multiple times. I could think back to 2002 when, like you mentioned earlier, Eric, like, it was just, a lot of our athletes, hey, I want to win, right? Like and that's all it was in 2002. I want to win a pro card. So that entire prep, that's all the focus was on. The show itself, I was stressed because I wanted to win. And when I didn't win, it was like such a defeat, and it was demoralizing, and I went into a depression, and it was just like, I didn't enjoy anything looking back on 2002. The only thing I took from it now is like, I never want to repeat that again.
Yeah.
So it's changed my
lesson was, don't do that.
Don't do that. Have fun. Enjoy yourself. Yeah. So this season, again, it was like a lot of my fuel was enjoy the process. Especially, not to say, like, I'm definitely far from done, but at the time, like you said early on, I'm like, I don't even know if I can do this anymore.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to make sure I'm enjoying it just in case this is the last go. So I think I just have like a different, I guess, the experience level, just going through a lot of history there. I just want to make sure that I'm enjoying every single second, of the prep and every single show that I did. That's probably why I extended the season out a little too far. It's just like, hey, I'm having fun doing these shows. This is a blast. But yeah. But once we got to what show have we talked about now? We've gone to 4.
Let's see. We did
4,
Mayhem, Max Hype, guest posing in Washington, and the NGA Olympiad. So we're fourth show if we're counting
4.
Yep.
So that would be the middle of September, and then 2 weeks after that is when we did the Mexico trip, the family vacation. Right. So that's probably something we should probably share with the audience, because I know that's probably a big thing with some competitive bodybuilders is, trying to, intertwine, life with bodybuilding, vacations, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, you successfully traveled, had a vacation with your family, and looked really damn good on stage. It might as well have been another peak, kind of the same way you approached it. Big shout out to WMBF Mexico as well for bringing you out for that. So yeah, tell us about that whole experience and how did you manage that whole peak, you could say, and also the vacation, traveling while training and being present with your family.
So the vacation,
yes, that was two different occasions, right? You traveled for the guest posing, and then you traveled again for the vacation, if I recall correctly, right?
The vacation was the first go. So the first week of October, it was a family vacation. So a week-long trip to Mexico. And it was the following week, I had to travel back to Mexico City to do a guest posing. So it was 2 weeks back to back.
And you came home between them. So you didn't stay in Mexico.
No, I came. Yeah, we came back. So the family vacation, that was I just told my wife, why'd you schedule a family vacation a month before Worlds? But I mean, it is what it is, right? So I had to make the most of it. And it was just more or less like she told me, hey, just do what you do here, just do it over there. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, yeah, that totally makes sense. It's doable. So it's like, okay, keep all the variables in control. And the only issue was the training. Like cardio-wise, I knew, okay, we're going to be out and about getting steps. Most people on vacation, they're more active than they are at home, especially me, being that I work from home, sitting at a desk. So that wasn't a concern. It was more so the training. And I didn't want to be quote unquote selfish and just like leave 2 or 3 hours a day to go train. This is supposed to be a family vacation. So I'm like, okay, when I got to the Airbnb, I saw this water jug and I'm like, if I fill that thing up, that's like 40 pounds. I'm like, I could do a lot with 40 pounds. And I'm like, okay, so I was like, okay, let me just get creative. Again, this is something I would have never have done 5 years, 10 years ago. I would have been like, nope, sorry, I'm going to the gym, babe. I'll see you in 2 or 3 hours. I would have just went and just found a gym and stayed hardcore. So, I mean, push-ups, lunges, overhead presses with this thing, curls. I mean, I made it work. The intensity was enough, and I did enough to kind of get by. But the big thing with that trip was I got sick. So unfortunately, I had contaminated ice cubes, and I got sick. So it just tore me up. So it was like a 2 or 3 day period there where my diet really wasn't that great. It was actually, I was under eating. Got back, I was leaner, obviously. But then I had to try to recover and train. And it was more or less like my training was kind of like I was in a somewhat of a detrained state as far as strength level and that type of thing, because I was only training with the water jug. So I lost some training there. And then when I went to Mexico City, which was a quick turnaround, it was only like 1 or 2 training sessions before the guest posing. It was more like, okay, I don't want to go hard here because I don't want to be sore trying to pose. And just with the travel, it just was a lot. And in hindsight, it probably wasn't the best thing to do before Worlds to go on back-to-back trips like that. Because when I came back from the Mexico City trip, I got sick again. So it was like a 3-week stretch there where training really wasn't too optimal. And I did see my physique when I got back from those 2 trips. My physique looked not the same. Like it looked like it had deteriorated a little bit from where I was previously. Like the months of August, September, I definitely looked a little bit fuller, harder, better, healthier. So it was, okay, get back from Mexico City. Oh, there's an NPC show in 2 weeks. Let's do that. And I'm like, the reason I did that show was, again, okay, Worlds is 2 weeks after the NPC show. I don't want to fly my kids across the country. This might be the last time Dad gets to compete. Who knows? So, hey, I want them there. We're going to actually do the show so they can actually have one last opportunity to see me. And I just think that, again, in hindsight, looking at that, it was just too much cluttered together. Getting sick twice, a vacation, a week, 2 weeks in Mexico, and then trying to peak for an NPC show. My body never got a chance to fully recover. which I did okay at the NPC show. I was competitive there. We peaked okay there, and then we had to do Worlds 2 weeks after that, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm kind of limping into the most important show of the year. I'm limping into it, as opposed to, eating up and being fully recovered. And like we talked about earlier, stress levels, like definitely stress levels were elevated, even though I didn't appear to be stressed. So,
yeah, I think there's a couple things to learn from this. Is that, for one, you looked really damn good despite all that, and being sick and having vacation and having had food poisoning, etc. So people are quite resilient, and maybe more so than they realize. And sure, there were effects of it, and there was a challenge, but it's pretty awesome that you're able to do all of that. I had a similar experience with all the travel I did during my season. And then two, I think there's a lot of value in taking the extended approach to prep, taking it longer, slower, taking diet breaks, periodizing it around life, having a lifestyle prep, as you called it. However, but once you get into shape, I think a new clock starts ticking. Once you're in really, really good shape, you're in a vulnerable position for as long as you're in shape. From the physiological side of it, I think there is the work you have to do to get into shape, which is what the long prep makes easier, because you don't have to make the deficit as big. You can have a more inclusive diet. You're not going to have micronutrient deficiencies. You're not going to have to do a ton of cardio and beat up your body. You're going to be able to recover better from training because you're losing weight slower, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You probably retain more muscle on a per unit of time. So all of those things that we've preached, taking a slower approach to fat loss, makes sense. But once you get into shape, which you basically were from June or July, into like unreasonably lean shape, and you stay there for a long time with low calories, even when you start eating up, I think that there is you start, like, you're just going to have a suppressed immune system. You're going to have a body that's less resilient to stress. So the more time you spend there, the more opportunities there are for shit to go wrong and for shit to go south.
It's kind of like you're on E, and you're like, oh shit, I need to make it to the gas station, and it's 30 miles away, and you're like, am I going to make it or not? And so you start driving that car a little bit differently. Obviously you can't accelerate as hard. You're like, oh shit, I'm going to run out of gas.
Yep.
So I think in hindsight, looking back, like, especially because I've analyzed photos and things like that, I'm like, okay, like mid-September, like I looked pretty healthy, like full healthy, and then you could kind of see each show after that. It was like, okay, starting to see, it looked like the way I kind of describe it, like a tired physique. Towards the end, especially the NPC show, I looked a little bit like the last one before Worlds, a little bit of a tired physique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jeff, talk about that a little bit. I remember it was one of our meetings that we had. I think it was maybe September, where you kind of confided in all of us that you were just tired of being lean. There were specific symptoms that you were experiencing that, although the physique looked great, it looked, sick, for lack of a better term. There were specific symptoms that you were having where you were just, I don't want to be this lean anymore. I'm sick and tired of it. And hurry up, have Worlds get here and then be done.
Yeah, I was like, I can't wait to get fat again. Like some people are like, oh man, I don't want to lose my shreds and all that. I was like, no, I can't wait till I have some back on me so I can feel good again. But yeah, it was like the experience I was having is like the sleep, like that was the biggest one, like sleep. It was like, okay, I could take melatonin, yeah, I get to sleep, but then I'm like, okay, I'm up at 3. It didn't matter if I went to bed at 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever. I was always up at 3, like probably the last 2 months of prep. It was getting to a point where I was like, my goodness, I feel like crap. No matter if I have a refeed or a diet break, it didn't matter. I'm not sleeping that well. And the only time I would get somewhat of a good night's sleep would be like after a decent sized refeed. So the sleep was the big one. The other factor too is just the time it takes to get shredded, as far as like time for getting in your steps or cardio, the time in the kitchen preparing food,
The
just
day to day.
the day-to-day, the hyper focus, it robs you of energy that, as much as you try to be balanced bodybuilder with like life and family and all that, it ain't ever going to be perfect. So, I mean, now that I'm 2 weeks post show, or almost 2.5 weeks post show now, my wife knows she can see a huge difference in me.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the first week she's like, oh my gosh, you're okay, good to see you happy again, So as much as we try, so that part of me, I was feeling a lot of guilt. Like, I know that the prep was taking a lot of energy away from family. And that's what was really getting to me more so than anything, even the sleep. Like, that was just bugging me probably the last couple of months. And I'm like, okay, yeah, this needs to hurry up and be over so I can get back to normal life again.
Yeah, I experienced the exact same thing, and I think I was bitching about my sit bones and not sleeping and not having any libido, and just, even no matter what I did, just feeling off right around the end of July. Because I remember in June is where I had my gnarly dig, and that was so awful that bringing food up, even those, it was getting better than awful, but it never got good.
Yeah.
Like, I was eating at maintenance, doing very low cardio, and but man, I was just like, this is just right at the end. Things started. I could tell I was vulnerable, and my last peak was really touch and go. And I could tell, like, oh, I remember this. This was like in '09, but then I kept going for another 5 months.
Yeah.
So, and I think we see a lot of competitors do that. That some in some ways the competitive schedule is set up in that way. So, like, if you want to do Worlds or the Yorton or the big shows, which are typically in November, the Olympia is also later in the year. I think it's late September or whatever. So regardless of which side of the fence you're on, if you're a high-level competitor, you're probably going to be doing shows early in the year and then later in the year. And I see a lot of times, even some of the really good guys who have low set points, and they just don't quite look as good. Like, people don't really hit their peak in the last show of the year often, unless they are able to sneak in a qualifier like last minute and then just start their prep like 6 months out for Worlds. For example, Brian Whitaker would prep 6 months before he got to hit the world stage. And when you're winning your class, you can just keep doing it year after year or whatever. But I think for a lot of people, especially sometimes you'll see there's a number of amateurs who did their first appearance was at Worlds. They gun for their card, get their card, and then the last show left is Worlds. Or they go, you know what, I want to keep my card, or I want to experience Worlds for the first time, and they end up having a season that goes from first show in May and the last show in November. So they've been in shape after they dieted for 5 months to get in shape, and then stayed in shape for 6 months.
Yeah,
and I think that's typically a recipe for not looking your best at the end of the year.
Yeah. That's like kind of what happened to me, and it's like I can tell, like, I was getting physically tired, and you can see the symptoms of all, but I was also mentally getting tired too, just that day-to-day grind. But yeah, it was like, man, and the reason, another part of the reason for doing like a lot of shows was just to keep you going, like, because I mean, if you factor, okay, you're in like extreme condition, right? You're just like Brad said, essential levels of body fat. Okay, I have a show on September 14th. Now, the Worlds is not until November 16th. That's 2 months of like, okay, why then, your mental starts to drift. Like, why am I, like a month later, like, why am I doing this? I feel terrible all the time. Mm-hmm. So having like those pit stops actually helped me get to Worlds. Because I think if I didn't have the vacation to Mexico, I didn't have the Mexico City guest posing, didn't have the NPC show, I probably would have ran out of fuel. And who knows, I might have said, you know what, this Worlds thing's not worth it. Let's just call it a day. So that, I think in a way it was like, yeah, the prep was long, but I think having those pit stops actually helped me.
Yep.
But that's not everybody's situation. I think that was pretty rare for me to have all these things. I didn't like in the beginning of my prep say I'm going to do all these things. They just kind of just along the way just kind of fell into place, and they kind of just sprung up. So, but yeah, I was like mentally getting tapped out there towards the end.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point where the only for sure show was Well, it's funny. Mayhem wasn't for sure, but then at a certain point it became for sure. But then Max Hype was, hey, why
Yeah.
not? Turn into
Yeah,
vacation.
'cause yeah. Mayhem was like, yeah, we did that, and it was like 2 days later, oh, Max Hype, let's do that.
Hmm.
It wasn't planned, and then the guest posing in Washington popped up. Like it was actually the week before. Hey, do you want to come up and guest pose? Okay. And then the NGA Pro Olympian, same thing. I wasn't planning on doing it. It was just like, oh,
Yeah,
okay,
we talked
there.
about that in August.
So all these shows, like the only shows that were, let's say, more of a given were Mayhem and Worlds. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but I think
in 5 month lag.
Yeah. So now that we know, looking in hindsight, we know, okay, hey, if I'm going to do this as a 50-year-old next time, yeah, I'm not going to go from, a 14-month prep. I'm like, okay, let's keep things a little bit tighter in the off season, and let's make sure this prep is shorter, and let's maybe pick some. If Worlds ends up being a goal show, let's pick something a little closer to it, so I can just boom qualify, do Worlds, done. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about time frames, it's interesting how sometimes it gets devalued or overlooked. You say, Jeff, well, I went like a solid 2 months with getting up at 3 a.m. Some folks will be like, yeah, it's 2 months. It's a drop in the bucket. But yeah, let's think about that in terms of like when you were in that life, living that thing. If somebody was to tell me today that for the next 60 days, the next 60 tomorrows, the next 60 sleeps, as kids sometimes say before Christmas, you're not going to get a full night's sleep. No. And when you're in like day 15 of that 60-day dig and you've got another 45 to go, that's borderline hell.
Yeah. Well, that's like jumping in a hot bath. You're like, all right, yeah, this feels really good. Then all of a sudden that water starts to get cold, and it's like ice cold after a while. It don't feel pleasant anymore. Yeah, now you got to sit in that bathtub for 2 months. Yeah, that's some dirty water, by the way.
And it gets dirty in prep. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, it is so much of it is mental and finding ways to occupy your time in both the long, short, and medium term. I made the call during my prep to dig hard in June because I had my show, but going from April to July was actually really hard for me, having that big break, the May-June break, and just being able to get the dirty work done fast, even though it was probably suboptimal, then start eating up. It broke it up for me instead of feeling like I was on like half tank for the full 60 days or 90 days. And so I think that's really the way you got to look at this, is that it's kind of going to be a mental slog to make it through a long prep. So you want the prep to not be any longer than it needs to be. And you also need to figure out a way to game plan that for your emotional sanity so you can stay and keep the goal, as Dan John says, and focus on what you're trying to get things done. And in your case, that ended up being adding new little goals along the way.
Yeah, that kind of kept me going. Also, too, I think like the most fuel, or I should say the in fuel, or however you want to word it, is that, like I said from the beginning, as I wanted to cross the finish line. So Worlds was like that finish line for me. And I mean, now that it's like we're 2.5 weeks removed, until I got the professional pictures that I got today, it was kind of like, had mixed feelings about it. Like, okay, yeah, I did it. Deep down, yeah, I wanted to be top 5 because I wanted to show people, hey, as a 48-year-old, you can still be pretty damn competitive and place top 5 in Worlds. Didn't happen, so it was like, oh man, it didn't hit that. But it wasn't like I'm crying off stage or anything. Like I was totally devastated. It was just more like, ah, shit, man, that didn't happen. And it was more like I knew going in my physique, like I said, my physique, I knew kind of just like wasn't looking the way it should. So that was kind of bugging me. So it was more like, I'm happy that I finished, but at the same time, it wasn't the exact result that I was hoping for. So if I had to think about how do I come to terms with this the last 2.5 weeks, and I think when I take a big step back, especially after seeing the pictures today, I'm like, man, I look pretty damn good. I was actually like, I didn't look as bad as maybe I thought. And I think it was the expectations that I had. Like, when I first started the prep, it wasn't, hey, let's place top 5 or top 3 or whatever. But as the prep unfolded and as I gained more confidence, like you said, Eric, like I got off the canvas, I'm like, okay, I'm knocking people out now. Like, hey, let's I can do this. Worlds, I might be able to crack this top 5 again. And so I think my expectations shifted throughout the prep. So my expectations were like 2014 expectations, which I think realistic. Who knows? Maybe yes or no. I don't know. But I think I've come to terms now that for 48 and going through everything I've gone through and putting the physique that I did out there on stage 7 times this year, I did pretty damn good. And I had so much fun along the way. And all I have to do is just go back to all the photos that I've taken. Like each show, I look at all the photos, and I mean, like me and Sam, Sam and Ethan, those photos of those guys, and it's photos like you and me are with that one photo, and Brad and Berto, I mean, that photo, and having Andrea there, and branding, and all these people that, are supporting me along the way. It's like, that's what I think of more so than like, oh shit, I didn't place top 5. And then when I found out I was actually 6th, I'm like, 6 out of 14? And then someone posted, hey, 6th in the world sounds pretty good. I'm like, it does, yeah. And I'm like, so yeah, it's like, okay. Yeah. So I'm pretty fulfilled from all different perspectives. Like from a competitive standpoint, I'm pretty happy. And just more so from a process standpoint, because I know I've learned a lot through this prep. Like there's some things like we talked about we could have like done differently now in hindsight, but that's how we learn, right? Like I'm sure Brad, Eric, same thing with you. You could look back on your preps and go, okay, yeah, I could have did this better or that. So, and a lot of people followed my journey and I shared it. So I use that as a tool and a vehicle to teach people. And now that we're doing this podcast, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's just very, very fulfilling. And that's why I want to come back again as a 50-year-old. Like now I'm like, yeah, I'm going to come back. I'm as a 50-year-old, have more fun and prove to people that you can still do this in your 5th decade, like Eric says.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult. Go ahead, bro.
Well, you go ahead, because I was going to kind of come around full circle and start talking about recovery. So you go ahead and go.
Yeah, I was going to just say how difficult it is to be objective, and that's even true for a veteran like you, Jeff, and I know it's true for me, that my perspective based on what's said to me, the quality of the picture or video I see, and what I can see in the mirror. Like I remember so for those who don't know, at the Mayhem, the mirrors backstage and the lighting backstage, you look bad. Doesn't matter what kind of shape you're in. And then when I saw pictures of me on stage, I was like, oh shit, that's the best I've ever looked. And arguably, I think it was the best peak I had that whole season. And I was just like, wow, like that was me at my best. But backstage, it was demoralizing and negatively affected me. And I remember I thought I was a little spilled over when I was talking to Berto. And now looking back in hindsight and being removed from it and being able to look at the pictures and talk to Berto, I was like, I think you fucking nailed that peak. Thanks, brother. And sorry for saying like you spilled me over or anything like that. And I just think that's something that really strong-headed or stubborn bodybuilders, it might take them months or never if they don't actually get good quality pictures to look at, or someone who gives them feedback, or if they don't have a coach or no one to discuss the outcome with. And I think it's also something where judges are probably too cavalier with what they say and how they say it and the feedback they give. But it's just so important how I think it's so important to have people you can rely on to give you honest feedback, and to also not put too much stock into your assessments until you're a few months post-season, in my opinion. Yeah. So you can really kind of assess things. Because shit, dude, I look at your season and you placed second to a world champion twice. You won a pro show. You won a class at an NPC show. And, for those who don't know, for not in the States, it's a non-tested show. You kicked ass at 2 guest posts, and then you placed 6 out of 14 in one of the most competitive world championships of all time. So, I mean, like objectively in this subjective crazy sport, you crushed it. And I also thought this was, in my opinion, there were stage outings this year where you'd never looked better compared to any other season. So, well done.
I appreciate that. I'm getting the woo woo from.
And yeah, I mean, I would have
yes,
to.
Our silent producer was raising the roof.
I would have to agree, Jeff. You know, as you were sharing the photos prior to us coming on to this podcast, um, I had the big question mark. It was like, you really could have been leaner, Jeff. I mean, this is the leanest that I've ever seen you. You know, and I've seen you for decades, both in real life and in photos. You know,
but we're bodybuilders, right, Brad? So we always want to do better. We always strive for more. And so on one side of the sword, yeah, I'm very happy with what I brought to the stage this year. I think certain looks during the season was my best ever. And, you know, of course, you're going to always look, like when you're on the world championship stage, you're going to look at your competition. And what I've realized, and I think what I realized at first walking off stage, I'm like, man, I didn't place top 5. What happened? Because 2014, I'm 4th. And I'm like, man, I think I'm better than I was in 2014. So, but, you know, I walked off a little disappointed, but then I realized maybe a day or two later, like, how awesome is it that over the last 5 years, like I've progressed a little bit, but the sport has evolved. And knowing as a coach, as, you know, 3D Muscle Journey coach, I know we've had a small role in that to help elevate the sport. And I think that's cool that, you know, hey, there's 5 guys in my class that were legitimately better than me. And I can live with that. Like what I couldn't live with is, let's say I've like, okay, I had, you know, like back in 1999 or 2000, when I ate a box of ding dongs a week before the show and I sabotaged my prep. That it was hard to live with. But knowing that I did everything that I could with this prep, you know, under, you know, the confines of my prep, I did everything I could to be at my best. And there's just other people that are better than me. So looking at them, like I said, like kind of looking at Sam early in the prep, like, okay, you know, these people are going to push me to be better. So I don't look at it like, oh shit, I got my ass kicked, poor me. It's like, no, let me try to elevate in, you know, in the future and maybe, you know, better myself to reach that level. So looking at the competition and being a realist, like, oh, I should have won or whatever. It's like, no, I lost, and these guys had more conditioning than me. I was out muscled on some of my upper body shots. So those are some of the things I need to work on for the next time. So even though I'm a 48-year-old, I think I still have a little bit left in me to try to improve. So that's what 2020 is about, is, hey, let's take a year off, try to improve as a bodybuilder, but also, hey, let's take 2020 off so I can be a normal human again and my family can get all of me again for a year. And then we'll go back in 2021 and try again. So the things I want to improve in 2021, because I'm sure people are going to be like, what do you want to improve on? Like, I just want to bring my whole upper body up. I think when I look at the other 5 guys, their upper bodies are better than mine. Lower body, I think I can hang. So it's upper body. And then I want to basically improve the next time I prep. So a little less energy goes into prep and more energy towards the family. See if I can balance that out a little bit better. So those are the main things I want to work on.
So, hey, Jeff.
Yeah, I think... Sorry, Brad.
How many times have we done this now, Eric?
Every time.
This is 4 times that we've done this. So,
yeah.
You go first. I want to kind of talk about recovery, so you go first.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, like, it just goes to show you how, like, you can have a placing goal in bodybuilding, but it doesn't really mean. I mean, it definitely tells you what your place is, like in relative to the field currently, but it doesn't tell you how you perform relative to your previous seasons. Because, yeah, like this year, Worlds is huge. It was 340 competitors. It was truly a world championship. There was 70% of the field was from foreign countries. They had to break up into 4 weight classes. It wasn't just light, middle, heavy. There was bantam, light, middle, heavy. I think in 2014 there was 12 competitors in your class. This year there was 14, and with an additional class. So, for example, just to show you how it changes things, having more competitors, Levi was in your class, Levi Burge, in 2014. But this time he was a lightweight, and you were a middle. So you had, a very different field you're comparing against, more people. And so, like, yeah, is fifth place really fifth place in 2014 worse than sixth place in 2019? I don't know. But I definitely think you were at your best, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I agree.
So, Brad, I'll let you talk now.
Well, I just want to kind of talk about recovery. You're what now, about 2-3 weeks removed from Worlds? Is that right?
2.5. Yeah.
2.5.
We're going into the third week. Yeah.
And I mean, you guys tested this. So many of our clients are so stressed out during this time. They want to have the ideal reverse diet. They want to have the best of both worlds, keep their shreds and start eating more food and start, bringing their muscle back up again. And yet when so many, why don't we just say, relative unexperienced bodybuilders, this is like their most stressed time, because they want to hold on to this fantastic shape that they've got, but yet they can't adhere to stringent protocols anymore without the goal. The veterans are kind of like, you know what? This isn't nearly as stressful as you're making it out to be. Talk about that a little bit. Talk about maybe that difference in mindset with your inexperienced competitors that you coach, and get them through the recovery portion, and then how you and some of maybe your veterans that you coach are.
I think of course we'll point people to the recovery diet. They can go through in depth there how kind of our approach is. But I think for me personally, I've been transitioning well. So basically at the end of the prep was like right around 2,000 calories on low days. I just jacked it up to 3,000, between 3,000, 3,500. And like the first week I was up about 6-7 pounds, and I immediately felt way better. And my mindset wasn't around aesthetics. I'm like, okay, my mindset's been on aesthetics for 14 months. I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with it. And I know in order to be productive for a future prep, I need to get out of that state and be in an environment where I can actually improve my physique and be able to train in an effective state. And also I realized too, like big picture context, like for 14 months, my body basically went from a full tank to an empty tank. So when I came out of prep, my training, like a lot of people, when they come out of prep, they're like, oh, okay, now I'm going to overhaul my training. I'm going to change it all up. I'm going to start doing all this volume. To me, it was the opposite. I actually lowered my training frequency down from like hitting each body part twice a week to now once, temporarily, like for maybe a month. So I got maybe a couple more weeks, and immediately my lifts started to skyrocket. So you have like all that gas coming in the tank again with 1,000 calories higher, and then the training's going down. Well, my overall fatigue level is starting to diminish. So my supply is now way up. So I'm feeling way better now, and my lifts are just skyrocketing. And of course, when your lifts skyrocket, it's motivating, and it's easier to kind of detach from the aesthetics. You're like, okay, yeah, my abs are dissipating, but shit, look at my leg press. I'm almost back to 700 pounds on that thing. Who cares about those abs? So that's kind of where I've been as far as like transitioning. But I will say that I did have that empty nest syndrome that I think we all can have after a prep, because you're so hyper focused. You accomplish a goal. Now you wake up and you're like, now what? So right now I'm in the process of adapting to quote unquote that normal life again, because I've been living a prep lifestyle for like 14 months. So it's a little bit challenging. On Sunday I had a dark day, like all day. I was like, I can't put my finger on it. Just like I just felt depressed, and I had a blowout. Like I was eating all day long, like just shoving food in my mouth. And I'm like, why am I doing this? Making me, and by the end of the night, I felt terrible. I was bloated, and I'm like, okay, you need to just get some sleep, wake up, and get back on structure and move on. So since Sunday, I've been feeling a little bit better, but I'm not beating myself up over that. Like a lot of people would eat like being, oh shit, I shouldn't have did that. Now I'm gonna go do a bunch of cardio or whatever. No, it's like, okay, you know what? Just amnesia, move forward, and just carry on. And so I'd say right now I'm still processing the prep, like still kind of like what was successful, what wasn't, you know, started assessing the photos. Like I still, like Eric said, like it's probably going to take me another, you know, couple months to really kind of put everything into clarity and perspective. But right now it's just like mentally I'm kind of just allowing myself to slowly kind of just settle back into normal life and not over analyzing it too much and putting a lot more focus into my family and then back into my training.
Yeah, I think the recovery period is so much better when you commit to it. I think the typical place where a competitor is post-season is either really motivated or really frustrated. And they've been living kind of the grass is greener on the other side of the fence the whole time. Either that, you know what, this was great, I'm going to be able to stay lean in the off season and make great progress, or man, I can't wait to get big again. And then something in the process, some element can't be there. Like they make the progress, they get to eat more, they get to try this food, they're making great gains in the gym, but they hate the way they look. Or they're not recovering well because they are making sure they like the way they work, that they look, and they're just really stressed about it. Or they're only semi-committed. So when they have a blowout, like you said, which is almost inevitable, they think they have to correct instead of just going, right, amnesia, get back on track. And one of the things that I tell a lot of my competitors in the recovery diet process is, look, hey, we cut out all your cardio and we added 1,200 calories. And if you have a binge on top of that, hell, that's part of the recovery. Like you probably needed it, you know, like having a binge when you're super restricted and you're reverse dieting and you drop one cardio session, you add 200 calories. That's a natural consequence because you're still dieting, you know. But if you have a blowout when you're recovering, it just means that, man, you maybe need another little bump or another little top up, or you're just so mentally food focused. And I think it's when you just go, I haven't had any binges this recovery, but I have had a few days where I'm just like, I want to eat more. You know, I gave myself initially a range from 3,000 to 4,000, and I had a few days that were 4,000 calorie days. I wouldn't call them blowouts. I never binged, but when that happened, I let it happen. And the next day I was much more okay with it. But man, in 2007, when I was trying to control that process, it would be like huge binge, restrict. Yeah. So I think it's that acceptance and commitment that I think a lot of inexperienced competitors don't quite have that you do.
I think one tool too, that maybe because we're getting late in the podcast, but just one thing that's kind of helped me with the transition is I've been staying covered up. Like I've been training in my hoodie. I've been training in sweats. Like when I get in the shower, I don't look in the mirror. I'm like, I'm trying to focus more on how I'm feeling versus how I'm looking. And I think it's just, for me, it's been a nice little tool that's kind of helped me transition into, you know, like I said, quote unquote, back to normalcy.
I love it. You're a bodybuilder, not an Instagram model. And I think that's a really, really important lesson. A lot of people. So, Brad, anything else you want to ask or say before we wrap this sucker up?
No, not really, except I've been training in my hoodie too, and the new hoodies are very, very comfy to train in.
So you heard it here. The hoodies are amazing, and if you listen to this podcast, they're sold out. So sorry, you're going to have to wait until we do another run.
But yeah, I just want to say...
Closing words from you, man?
Yeah, thank you guys for all the support. Of course, my 3DMJ teammates, even the person behind the scenes right now that I can see you, everybody else just can't see her. But thank you guys, and thank everybody that's giving me support along the way, because genuinely it meant a lot, and it was definitely fuel that helped me kind of keep going, especially for 14 months. So thanks to everybody, and I'll see you guys when I'm 50.
Yeah, boy. And I just want to say, hugely inspirational season. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of it. And for those who did not follow along, we've got a few podcasts. There's this one, and Jeff did a lot of posts about it on his Instagram. So if you haven't followed 3DMJ Godfather on Instagram, make sure you do. 'Cause there's a lot of good stuff you can look back on and check.
Hey guys, this is Coach Alberto Nunez. Thanks so much for listening to our show today. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. I wanted to take a moment to remind you guys that we have a giant video library of educational materials at 3dmjvault.com. The vault is a place where we have organized our best information, paired it up with some of our favorite resources, and shared with all of you guys in one online database. We have courses on contest prep, hypertrophy, posing, fat loss, postseason recovery, and a whole lot more. Most of it is free. Some of it is for purchase to help support this podcast, and we continue adding pieces of updated content to it every couple of months that members always have unlimited access to. Once again, that's 3dmjvault.com, and we really hope you like it.